turn things over to Fanuel, who will intro our next activity.
Okay, so everyone, super excited that you're joining us for the second half. For those of you that are watching this in the not so long distant future, we've been having some wonderful conversations within our community about the challenges, things that we've accomplished in the past year, things that we want to do in the subsequent 12 months. And we have explored, I think, wonderful ideas and what people are working on. And I think that's an important piece to keep each other abreast in terms of who's doing what, where, and when. And so for this next part, I am just super excited to bring in someone from outside of our community to come in and continue these conversations, okay? Someone that has gone through and is going through what we are all experiencing right now with the challenges of starting an organization, running one, defining what success means, right? How do you collaborate, all the issues that many of our residents have already brought up today. And so Stephanie Fine Sasse, and I hope I said that right. We were debating how to say the last name. I was looking back. I'm going to refrain from spilling the beans too much because you're going to take us through your journey very briefly before we get into conversation. But I look back as to when we actually connected. And you know, it was at ComSciCon Harvard, where we were serving on a panel together. And there she was sitting on my right. And I'm wondering, who on earth is this person? And from then on, years have gone by. We have run into each other at conferences. And we were most recently in New York at Science Sandbox. And we are always continuing the same conversation about the challenges we're facing, where are the opportunities, can we collaborate? Right. And so I knew that she will be a really fantastic person to bring in today and engage in these conversations. And so she'll go through, give us a quick spiel of her work, and then we're going to get into conversation. I'll have a few questions, but I hope this will be a community-wide engagement. I really hope we can do that, okay, in a really kind of fireside chat manner. Okay, so I will refrain from any more speaking. Stephanie, you have the floor, and welcome. Welcome to our community.
Thank you. Thank you. I so appreciate being invited to this conversation, and I share your thoughts. It seemed to me like the goal here is to continue the conversations that you and I already have, and that's really exciting. It also speaks to the sort of realities of this, is that these conversations never end. As you're building and working towards impact and change, they might morph and adapt a little bit to new circumstances and challenges, but they're always ongoing, which speaks to the importance of ongoing community. So like you said, I'm going to start by giving y'all just a quick orientation to what lenses I bring to this conversation and what some of the work I've done has been and looks like, and just so that you have some idea what my background is. All right, share my screen. Okay. Can everybody see that all right? Awesome. Yep. So my name is Stephanie Fine Sasse, and this piece of artwork is created by Ashti Miller, who's one of the artists that we're currently collaborating with on an upcoming art and science exhibition that will be premiering in San Francisco next year. This piece is part of an exhibit called Nature Knows Best, that's engaging communities around San Francisco with conversations about circular ecosystems and engaging with the sort of critical ecologies and sustainability questions. So. All right, so a little bit of framing for who I am and the lenses I come from. I have 3 hats that I've worn through my career so far, and sometimes I wear more than one at the same time. Sometimes it's just been one. I'm a scientist. I spent about 8-9 years in research. That's my sort of formal hat, my formal training. I have been in experience design even longer than that. So I started working in experience design in late 2000s. And by which I mean creating multimedia, multisensory ways for people to engage with knowledge. So sometimes that was through events, sometimes that was through physical objects, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. And then I've also been an organizer, so planning community-focused advocacy events at some pretty large scales. So to start with, I thought it would be interesting to sort of walk through each piece through the primary guiding question that was sort of pushing me through that hat, that lens. So for me, as a scientist, the reason I got into neuroscience as a neuroscientist by training, in particular, was to try to understand how our brains make sense of all of the things, ourselves, information, the ideas we encounter, Obviously, that is a very big question. That is not a testable question. So I needed to narrow that down quite a bit. But that's what I was interested in understanding. And in particular, I was looking at emotions, the role of emotions in decision-making and identity formation, how they influence the way we make sense of ideas and information, how we attach to beliefs, and why sometimes some people seem to be able to detach and others hold on very tightly or to some ideas. So that's the sort of thing that fascinated me. And I did that work with Leah Somerville at Harvard. And I also was doing that work at the Ed School at Harvard. So it was the neuroscience world and then also the Ed world. And one of the things that was a major pivot for me that had a massive impact on my journey was the two labs I was working in at the same time. Both were interested in emotions, development, the role of these things in decision-making on the same campus. Didn't know each other existed because one was in education school and one was over in the neuroscience psych department. And that blew my mind that we could be asking such similar questions and interested in the same, understanding the same general forces, and to on the same campus not know each other exist or have spaces for collaboration or co-communication. So that changed my question a little bit. I slowly started to pull myself outside of the sort of traditional bench science space and started to ask, what do we already know? Rather than what can I learn proactively that hasn't been known before, what do we already know about these same questions? And so I shifted my focus. I was still working in the lab, but shifted my focus a little bit to looking across the literature, across different disciplines, talking to and interviewing community advocates and practitioners, and trying to do my best to synthesize what was already known on the questions of how do we make sense of ourselves. One of the terms I like to use is socio-scientific identity. How do we form our sense of identity in relationships to science or to ideas? And how does that influence the way that we engage with and interact with science and other related knowledge spaces? So these are a couple of the frameworks we started to develop. This is ongoing work. So we actually just got funding to sort of synthesize a lot of these things into what we're calling the Human Change Atlas. And that the goal of that is to take all of that synthesis and try to make it as accessible, create a friendly, usable interface for anyone to be able to access that knowledge more readily, because it drives me crazy when you look around the world and you see all the ways in which what we have learned collectively isn't being put to use. So that's one of the things we're working on. The second question, as a designer, that has driven me, so experience design in particular, but I do have sort of by necessity working in nonprofits, had to learn quite a few different parts of the design world. But what types of experiences support openness, curiosity, and engagement? So that was sort of a through line of the questions I was asking early on. Great, it's awesome to have that theory, but how do we actually put that to the test? How do we see what's actually, what are people actually connecting with? What actually works? What gets people excited? And so for that, I started out doing some more conventional stuff, creating interactive arcade games early on. That was the very first project I ever worked on the left there, in 2009, I think. And it was an arcade game that went around Oregon to try and get students to engage more with the impact of alcohol on the brain. And so I started there and then started getting more and more experimental in time. I got more audacious and I got more risk-taking and more interested in trying things that hadn't been tried and breaking conventions. And then in 2016, my team and I, we started our nonprofit in 2012 softly. So it was not yet incorporated as a 501c3 until 2016. And we decided to do a little experiment. It was a one-off event. We didn't think we were going to do anything else with it. We felt free because we were like, it's just a fundraiser. We can do whatever we want. We turned back to those frameworks, those guidelines, and those principles. And we decided to do something from the ground up that was not bound by convention or tethered to the way we thought things were supposed to be. And that was where the sort of Plenary was born, which is the name of the nonprofit. And that was an art and science exhibition where we brought together artists, scientists, storytellers, technologists to create this immersive interactive space where people could explore ideas in a highly participatory, participant-centered way. And we found that most of the ways that people engage with information and science is passive consumption. So we were really interested in asking that question, what if it's not passive? What if it's extremely active and participatory? And what if rather than just saying it's about science, what if we look at the issue and we say, what are the different lenses that can inform this issue in a meaningful way and bring those voices together with an equal level of esteem and respect? So that's the sort of spaces that we started to experiment with. And we found that it was very impactful. And so we explored that model more. That third hat I mentioned as an organizer, I was really interested in how do you get people to show up. to, because awesome, let's say you have this great event, you have this great program, whatever it is, how do you get people to actually show up for it? Which is a whole other set of questions that I was interested in. And aside from the theory, I had a few sort of lived experiences to test that out and see that firsthand. One was I am co-creator of a program called I'm a Scientist, which is a multimedia storytelling campaign that takes the stories of scientists from across personalities, backgrounds, perspectives, lenses, fields, and brings those stories to classrooms. So we launched that not knowing how it was going to go. We started creating posters that featured all these different faces and stories and put them out into the world and started to try and build this community. And we launched in 2020, right before the pandemic and everything shut down. So it was a fascinating time to try and build a new community. But it was successful. And I learned a lot through that experience. We are now we've distributed over 65,000 posters to schools across the US, in particular Title I and rural schools. And we are now serving over 500,000 students annually, which is extremely exciting and happy to talk more about sort of what we've learned there. I also was one of the co-organizers of the March for Science in San Francisco, then nationwide as well. And that gave me sort of front row seat to all sorts of like trial and error and major issues and hiccups. It was each of these parts of my work have been both incredibly informative and helped me understand how to move through these spaces while also being incredibly difficult and challenging. So happy to talk about those pieces, as well as also the primary creator and producer of the Science Summit, which was a March for Science initiative in Chicago that brought together global leaders who had run marches from around the world to sort of coalesce and to try to find ways to collaborate and do work together. That all leads me to what I do now. So all those pieces got sort of woven together into the Plenary Co., which is a 501c3 arts and education nonprofit. We focus on socio-scientific issues. So we create creative pathways through those issues. How do we bring artists, storytellers, kind of what I was mentioning earlier with our event, together in partnership with communities, designing and co-designing with communities to create spaces where they're excited to participate in these issue areas, making sense of them. We work with community members that we're aiming to serve from the first day that we start designing. And then we also work equally with experts and scholars and scientists and artists. And it's been a really wonderful learning experience for me. And it sort of led to this current guiding question, which is how do we redesign our relationship with knowledge and change being a huge part of that, and being open to change to better serve people and the planet. And these are some of the projects we're working on right now. And we are lucky to be working on this big event that sort of pulls all these pieces together. Like I mentioned, it's going to launch in San Francisco next year with support from Science Sandbox from the Simons Foundation. And it's going to be a very fun test of a lot of these theories and models that we've been playing with for over a decade now. So it's a little bit about me. Hopefully that gives you a sense of who I am and where I'm coming from. And I am really excited to have this conversation. And please do chime in the comments and let us know what you want us to talk about, because, or just pop on your video, because I feel like there are so many things that I wish that I had learned the easy way and not the hard way. So if there's anything that I can help others skip in terms of the hard parts, I'm very happy to do so.
Yay, this is amazing. In fact, yeah, if they're questions for the community, I then just don't need to do anything. I'm gonna just channel them directly to you, Stephanie. Oh, Twitter handle, Stephanie. Okay, there we go. Nice. We're gonna get through this rapid fire as well. I wanted to throw this out there first. One of the biggest challenges that we all have, as myself as well, is defining impact. And this is a loaded question, Stephanie. Okay, we can spend 3 hours discussing it. You've gone through many iterations of starting something right from the ground up, seeing at that level. What has been your strategy in getting to defining what impact means for all your initiatives?
Oh, wow, what a question to start with. Defining impact. So a couple of things come to mind for me. The first thing is, I think that it is the hardest part, and maybe one of the most important transformations that I ever went through, was shifting from defining impact in terms of what the people with power wanted me to define it as, the people with money, the people with resources, the people who sort of what I call the faceless others that had surrounded me through my academic years and in the research lab, sort of the pressures and what I thought they wanted impact to be, and squaring that and shifting away from that and towards defining the issues that I cared about and who the true stakeholders were in those issues, and shifting to say what would impact me there. That was a really important shift point for me. It's hard, and I think you and I've talked about this a lot. It's like a constant compromise and sort of figuring out the trade-offs there, because there are always trade-offs when we're talking about, stepping away from what the funders expect of you. But it's, I think, extremely important when I think about how I have defined impact over the years. Early on, I defined impact as the same things that a funder would define impact as. How many people did I reach? What are my numbers? What is my, let me do my evaluation metrics, and let me make sure I have everybody scored 4 or 5 on this. And, I would measure it the way that you're rewarded for measuring it, which is oftentimes not the, I think, most truly impactful way to measure impact. So over time, and after seeing that show that sort of interrupted my path there, where it was a total deviation from conventional fundable initiatives, that was impact for me. That shifted my view of impact, because what we saw was members of our community who had never shown up to a science exhibition before, not showing up once, but showing up multiple times. One guy in particular, he showed up the first day, he came back the second day with his kids and walked them through this space. He came back again that night with his firefighter buddies, and then he's walking around the room, pointing things out, showing his friends things. He became the advocate in that space. And all of the conventional sort of funder-oriented work that I had done, I'd never seen something like that happen. So that was a shift point for me in terms of how I define impact. And it went from, yes, of course, you have to dot the I's and cross the T's for the funders, but it shifted from funder-oriented or resource-oriented to who is it that we actually care about serving, and how do we pay mind to their reaction, their response, their engagement, and their co-creation, because I think that's an important piece of it that I've learned since too. And what about you, though? How do you define impact in your work?
I think, yes. So guys, by the way, this is a dynamic conversation. Stephanie can ask us questions, okay? So be ready for that, okay? And that's been a challenging there, Stephanie. And I'll tell you from an SAI point of view, when we started, we didn't know what the impact, what impact we wanted to have. And at times that's okay, right? We were searching to understand where the problems are. And I actually feel it's really important to spend time doing that, right? You don't have to rush into things. For our fellows, it's always, we challenge them to say, okay, how do you know this is the problem? Have you talked to that constituent that you think are having this problem, right? To find that. So it's been a discovery for us, because we landed on realizing actually founders in these spaces are the ones having a lot of trouble. Because it's funny, because I was one having those issues, and I couldn't visualize, say, oh, actually, this is a problem that I'm having. There should be others, tons of others that are having it, and it sure was. That was the case. And so we focused, right? We focused over time to think about the community, as you said, to think about what their needs are. And you're right, you run into funders and they have their agenda, right? And you have to kind of find the middle ground there, staying true to what you feel is important, being flexible, of course, but also sticking true, right? And reaching each other in the middle. But it's hard. I tell you that it's an ongoing thing, as you know very well. With each grant, you're reassessing and saying, how do I pitch this?
And I love that.
About pitching.
Yeah, well, and I love the way that you're framing that. And I think another piece of it called to mind for me was the role of humility in this, because you have to be in a constant state of openness to change. I think it's important that you be really deliberate about whose influence and whose voice can drive that change for you. Are they people who are saying things that are rooted in convention and the way things have been? Or are they people who you're aspiring to be working with more closely, or to aspiring to learn from? That's important. But as long as the sources are sort of aligned with your actual goals and not just your anxieties, I think it's really important to remain open to iterating your impact purpose, your mission, all of those pieces of how you define impact in the first place. I think if you'd asked me this question early on, my answers for what I wanted to accomplish would have been so different. And now they're not just mine anymore. They're this sort of conglomerate that is an assembly, a mosaic of all of the influences, all of the people I've talked to and learned from, all of the members of the communities that we've worked with that have, in many cases, been like, that's a stupid idea. You're going to need to change it in all of these ways in order for me to care about it. And that's so invaluable. And it requires that we carry with us a level of true humility and excitement about learning from different sources, different lenses, the things that we don't already know, so that we allow those sort of our concept of impact to shift and evolve with it. So.
And you're learning so much, right? Evaluation, what we're talking about now, is one aspect, right?
Yes.
I mean, I was in the funding group, and financial literacy actually came up as a big thing. Again, half the time you're trying to figure stuff out that you have no clue how to do, right? So how have you navigated that, Stephanie?
Oh my gosh, when it comes to the operational stuff, the late nights, I mean, I hate to say it because I'm a big believer in, like, you know, take care of yourself. But if I'm being honest, it was a lot of late nights and weekend work and just tireless hours of watching all of the YouTube videos and talking to anyone that would talk to me. I think that was a big thing too. Working in nonprofits, I talked to so many different people about how to manage financial projections or develop financial projections, how to balance a budget, how to make a proper nonprofit budget. And everybody I talked to had a completely different body of advice. And so in some ways that's stressful. In other ways, it's a little empowering in the sense that you're like, okay, great. I can look across these different pieces, sort of bodies of knowledge and resources, and figure out what works for me. What types of projections do I want to invest my time in? What types of like annual budgets versus strategies, financial strategies resonates with me? Because there's so many different ways to do this stuff. I know for me, I will tell y'all, the best thing I ever did was to prioritize being able to hire a bookkeeper as soon as possible. I know it sounds like such a small thing, but it's about knowing yourself and knowing, like, where are you going to get caught up? I know for me, I like numbers a lot, but I will get caught up there, making sure everything makes complete sense, everything's perfectly organized, and I will spend way too much time trying to figure out exactly how to do things correctly. So having an expert come in and take that piece, there's actually a surprising number of people that are relatively affordable that can support you on those types of things if it's specific tasks. So looking for things to offload as early as possible to experts, to pros that can really free up your time can make a huge difference. And I know somebody was talking about grant allocation earlier, thinking about that, like when you're applying for grants and making the argument, you know, this is why this is important. This is how this is going to make a big difference on our impact. And including those things as line items and knowing that you can defend them and back them up. And sometimes people will get it. So, yeah. So, I mean, that's a terrible answer to your question, but it's like a little bit of everything, including trying not to do it myself.
Yeah, I mean, I exactly with you, like just late nights, YouTube videos, literally,
Yeah.
I'm hearing you, I'm like, yes, this is exactly it. And so guys, as you listen to this, it's not like, oh, I knew the stuff. Actually, no. And in fact, I still don't know half of it, right? And it's just about humility, as you said, knowing what you don't know, and also the stuff that you don't know, right? And knowing that you're going to run into it, and just pushing it to say, okay, I want to figure this thing out. Do I bring in someone? When do I do that, right? As long as you're asking these questions, I think that's the secret here.
Absolutely.
You got to be asking these questions.
And ask other people. I think that's the other thing is, I mean, so many people will talk to there's a lot of nonprofit mentor networks. None of them for me have ever been particularly useful long-term. There's not like anybody I've connected with long-term, but for one-off conversations, they're awesome. Like there's so many groups where people who have been in the nonprofit world for decades will hop on a call with you and say, what do you want me to tell you? And they will just unload all of their knowledge for you free. It's just a volunteer network. And I highly recommend looking for those in your either in your area or ones that are nationwide, because I mean, that made a huge difference for me. Now, granted, I did not agree with everything because, you know, even nonprofit worlds are subject to the same biases and institutional issues that any other industry has had. So I would take everything with a grain of salt, but certainly when it comes to technical stuff like this, gosh, I'm so glad people will tell us how to do it, because otherwise I would just be spinning.
Yeah. And I've run into people in conferences and said something like, oh my goodness, I need to do that. Then I run back and like, oh yeah, I need to do that. So questions from the community, please feel free to throw the questions in there, or else I'll just keep rolling through.
How do you find those networks? I'm just curious because it sounds really, really good.
Yeah, Google. Literally everything like that that I've ever found has just been Googling. So I will Google weird combinations of search terms until I find something that I like. So I'll do, free mentorship nonprofit startup or network of mentors, or another really good tool is joining Facebook groups. I know that sounds so random, and I know some people are very against Facebook right now. Totally different conversation, valid concerns. But I find that the Facebook groups in particular that focus on nonprofit founders or developers are really, really valuable for these types of things. So you can search, I think there is one called Nonprofit Founder Community, something like that I'm in. But there's a number of ones. If you go into Google or if you go into Facebook and search different variations of like nonprofit community support, things like that, you'll see these, like some of them have tens of thousands of members. And they will support you in answering questions that you have. I've asked a number of questions in there around like, hey, y'all, like I really need some help with legal compliance stuff. Are there any resources out there that you know of that might help me? And people are so happy and quick to give you answers. And so I really highly recommend asking for help, finding spaces like that where you can ask for help. And yeah, like Fanuel was saying earlier, I feel like building that community and using it and leveraging it, it makes all of the difference in the world, and getting bold and being willing to ask for help.
Exactly. Corey.
Hi there. So I was just part of the program and the management breakout room, and one of the things that kept coming up was just funding. And I mean, you said that like don't think too much about what the funders think, but they also are the ones who have the money. So
Yeah.
So how do you identify funders in the first place? How do you work with them? How do you find a sustainable funding path for your particular initiative or model?
I feel like we both have to take this one because I think we have slightly different paths through this. And so for me, it was really important early on to think about nonprofits as from a business point of view, and not in terms of wanting to make money, obviously, because that's not the goal. It's not profit driven, but I do want to be, and I know Fanuel and I talk about this all the time, I do want to be an independent organization in time. We're not there yet, meaning I don't want to be bound to funders. So I'm constantly looking for ways to diversify our revenue streams. And so it's kind of, to answer your question, it's kind of a few different pipelines happening at the same time. There's pipeline one, which is to say, okay, how do I build relationships that will give me sort of insider information about which funders are looking for people like me and my team and what we do, because they're out there. There are funders that understand that the industry itself, the industry of philanthropy, the industry of funding is broken and will work with you in more flexible ways. There are also a lot of microgrants out there that are specifically for more risky ideas. So I think that the first piece is going to every conference you can, every summit you can, networking like crazy, talking to people, asking these questions of them: who funds you? Who have you enjoyed working with? Getting to know funders, really sort of creating a network map in your head of who are the funders in my spaces and what are the relationships that they have with the people that they have funded. Reach out to some too, reach out to some fundees from an organization you're interested in getting funding from, and ask them, be like, hey, can I just do 30 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it is of your time? I'm interested in this space, but I want to get a sense of what your experience has been like with this funder. So you can kind of characterize funders in that way. That's like one pipeline there. We were really picky sometimes. Sometimes we avoided pursuing funding in a particular space because we knew that particular funding stream, that vertical, or that organization is really particular on XYZ factor that we didn't want to sort of let our mission drift towards. So I think it's kind of a balance, like Fanuel was saying too, it's this constant balance of what am I willing to compromise on? What am I willing to give up? Like a little bit here, because that's not core to what I'm doing or what I'm serving. So I can do that for the funders. And then what am I really protective of, and looking for funders who are going to respect that. That's the first pipeline. And that's just research and talking to everybody. Then the second big pipeline there, I think, is at the same time, what are ways that I can get creative with what I offer that will allow me to make money through other avenues? And so some of those avenues for us have been corporate sponsorships that are almost our entire I Am a Scientist program was built via corporate sponsorships. So that's one avenue. Memberships, where you're writing newsletters. You know, there's a big sort of newsletter support community out there these days, where if you produce great content and distribute it digitally, quarterly, monthly, whatever's tenable, realistic for you, there's a whole sort of community of people who will align with your mission, who will show up, especially if the content itself is somewhat of a gift and a product in a sense. People will give you a little bit of money to support, and a lot of little money ends up being a lot of money. So getting a lot of people to give you a little bit goes a long way. So that's another thing that we've done over time. And then there's also, I mean, there's so many different avenues. There's ticket sales. That's another thing that we do, is we have like a sliding scale for any events that we do. We don't ever want it to be a barrier to entry, but we have a lot of opt-in payment options for people. So that's really bespoke to your organization. But I would say it's that combination of things, of like creating your pie chart and saying, what are the different revenue streams that I can lean into? What are the grant funders relationships that I want to build, and getting a strategic plan to getting those funders to give you money, but then also figuring out what are the other more independent avenues that I am in control of that I can start building out. And Fenwell, I know you and I have talked about this a lot too. What about for y'all? When you think about the independent funding stuff a lot too?
Yeah, very important. That's the whole reason we started our own endowment, for example, right? You're thinking 15, 20 years from now, okay, we want to be independent. What can we do to start that now, right? So I think you have to also think way ahead, right? If you really are serious about this, and I think took me a while to realize, if you are serious about this, start planning, right? Plans change, of course, but planning ahead helps a lot. I will say, I put in the chat there, one of the strategies to answer your question, Corey, as well, is that we become more selective in our applications. At the beginning, I used to apply to lots of different things, and the failure rate, the rejection rate was much higher, right? Because of that. Mm-hmm. Now, way more selective. I look for funders that actually align with what we're trying to do from the get-go, right? And then that begins the conversation, as Stephanie was talking about. Does the values fit? Does the culture fit? And I found that actually helps way more, develop that relationship. Suddenly they're open to hearing new ideas, so I think being more selective, and it takes time. We were discussing this in my group. It takes time. Mm-hmm. And Stephanie, how do you manage your time? And towards the end of our chat, I'm curious, because this all takes a lot of time. We're all doing other things on top of it.
It's a very important question. I do want to mention one more thing on that last point. I think another untapped resource a lot of times is partnerships. So one way early on, and actually even right now, that we get funding for some of our riskier projects is by partnering with an organization that is getting funded for something that's a little bit more established. And so basically we have a complex budget where some of that budget, or maybe even a majority, goes to them doing their work in this more conventional way, or in this more proven way where they have a pre-existing relationship with this funder, they trust them. And then we get sort of Trojan horsed in, and we're able to do some more experimental stuff, some more risky stuff as part of a larger partnership. And that's, again, so much of this, I feel like I'm a broken record on this, but it's really relationships. And it's just putting the time and energy into building meaningful relationships, which I know you and I've talked about as well, Fenwell, is like, what does that mean? How do you build a meaningful relationship with an organization or with an individual? And I think there's a little bit there around creating structures for that. So whether that's inviting people in for talks, or whether that is creating a group that meets up on a regular basis or cadence, where you say, hey, this is, what do you need? This community is going to get together to work on XYZ things, and you start building relationships that way. It's going to networking at conferences, and it's reaching out to people and asking them for advice. I mean, a lot of my best partnerships have come from what I call friend tours, people who we met on a semi-regular basis to share advice to each other. And then as we both sort of move in different directions with our work, we help each other out along the way, and give each other intros and give each other advice. And it really is just relationship building above all else, meaningful relationship building above all else. But to your question about time management, what is that? I think it's very important to take care of yourself. However, I am not always the best person at actually following my own advice on that. I don't know if that resonates with you too, but
No, it is. And I think I've a broken record as well on this topic. Taking care of yourself, really, really important. This is intense work. We're here, on the Saturday. I want to just say thank you to all, by the way, for being here. It takes a lot of time and you have to take care of yourself. I've made a bunch of mistakes on that front. But I try my best, exercise, sleep, tracking my sleep, how many hours I'm getting. It's like a little game. Okay, last week was bad. All right, this week, let's get it up by 30 minutes.
Well,
I applied to 1 grant, last month. I need to do 2 this month. All right.
yeah, I definitely try hard to break from any sort of like manufactured or sort of self-imposed have to do's by this, or like, oh, I'm failing if I'm not doing it by this time period, and being as kind to myself and my team as I can be when it comes to timelines and deadlines, and not imposing unnecessary pressures,
Right.
because there's going to be enough necessary pressures. Trying to let go and identify the difference between the two. But then for me, the biggest thing has always been planning to plan. That's really important for me. I always put time aside where the sole goal of that chunk of time in my life is to plan my time. And for me, when I'm planning my time, I try to identify what are the different sort of life categories that are really critical to me. And so I have 6 identified sort of life categories. And then I try to keep in mind roughly, I'm not like constantly obsessed with this, maybe slightly, but not constantly obsessed with this. I was trying to say, okay, what is my goal? Again, pie chart here of like how much time I'm spending or how much energy I'm investing into that part of my life. And one might be health and wellness. Another one might be friends and spending time with loved ones. Another one might be my relationship and my home life. And so I'm constantly sort of keeping track. And I said this, planning to plan. So it's like 1 Sunday a month that I just sit down and that is what I do. My whole day revolves around looking at that, what I've said is my ideal balance, and then looking at my reality and comparing the two and thinking through what are the ways that this month I can do a little bit better. What are the ways that I can bring, if I'm way down on health and wellness this month because work was massive, deconstructing that a little bit. Why am I stuck in that? What's the sort of underlying reason? Is it because I'm not scheduling my time wisely? Is it because I'm getting lost on priorities? I'm not focusing on priorities and I'm in passion planner. Awesome. Yes, I love that kind of stuff. But trying to make sure it's something that fits you too. What's a system that makes sense for you? Because my priorities aren't going to look like yours. And so making sure you get to know what does your ideal life feel like, what feels good, what cadence in these different life categories that matter to you feel really good. And then trying to deconstruct and understand what your true barriers are. Like Bree and I were saying this earlier, what are the gaps between who you're claiming to want to be and what you're actually doing with your time? And there's always answers there if we go a little bit deeper, and sometimes they're not what we expect. Sometimes my old accountability buddy and I, which I highly recommend getting an accountability buddy for those Sundays, if you're a social person and you enjoy that sort of interpersonal accountability. I had that for a long time. It was wonderful. And one of the things we would do for each other is we would reflect back. Is this a planning error or was this an execution error? Is it that you didn't plan well what you said you wanted to do? Or was the issue that you didn't do what you planned to do? And those are different issues when you're talking about sort of building a balanced life, and understanding which it is helps sort of guide you and navigate you into problem solving. So do we just start? Oh, that's awesome. Nice.
Yeah, this is for new residents. Yeah, and actually any resident that wants to participate in this, we're just matching residents to keep each other accountable, quarterly check-ins, make sure, hey, what are you struggling with? Are we struggling together? How can we make this thing work? So so with that, I am we can keep talking, Stephanie, for I feel like 2 years
forever.
It's intense, and I'm so excited that you have shared these insights. I'm definitely pumped up thinking just to how do I continue to better? That's my key question. You mentioned planning to plan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And I think this is a nice segue into this next part. And so this is I love this continuing theme of conversations, right? We're not sending you away, Stephanie. You're still here with us. We're just going to continue this conversation now into thinking ahead for SAI more broadly so that we all can be part of this. And so, Claire, you have some thoughts on maybe a slide, I don't know. Go ahead.
So definitely, I'm going to go ahead and drop a link in the chat right now. That is in the spirit, as we said, of planning and planning to plan. This is our strategic plan for the next 3 years from, I guess, starting now up until 2025, in which it's kind of weird to think about how 2025 is only not that far away. But what we've done over the past few months is we've gone back through, Fanuel and I and others have gone back through surveys and certain feedback that we've received from this SAI community in terms of residents and fellows and as well as interns. And we've taken the feedback and we've heard kind of these main themes of what you all would like to see from the SAI community, and how that's growing and how we can continue to develop and plan these endeavors. And so we've shared this before, but this is kind of just an opportunity for us to sit down together as a crew and work through these goals that we've laid out, but they can always adapt and change based on the conversations that we've been having and the endeavors that we are going through and the times that come up as well. And so we're a flexible group. And so one of the big things that the reasons why we've come from, or we were able to narrow into these 4 goals, for the first goal being our strategic goal is providing a top-notch support to SAI staff, residents, fellows, interns, and alumni, as well as moving into goal 2, which is expanding and promoting excellence in scholarship and social entrepreneurship. Goal 3, which is investing in organizational capacity and infrastructure. So thinking about technology, finance, communication, fundraising, et cetera, et cetera. And our 4th goal, which is broadening SAI's exposure and voice nationally and internationally. And there's certain key metrics underneath each of those goals. As well at the bottom, it's one of the really cool new tools that we've got going for SAI, which is our master data dashboard that Fanuel has come up with.
See, did we lose you, Claire?
We lost audio there for a second.
Yeah.
Am I back?
You're back now.
Okay. All right. Where did I leave off?
Let's see. You were at the
That's the
dashboard.
dashboard.
I was actually going to pitch it to you, Fanuel, if you want to explain your baby,
Yeah.
your new baby.
Yeah, well, no, this is our baby. I was going to say that basically this strategic plan, it's just as Stephanie was mentioning, right? You just have this, these thoughts that you put out on paper. And in fact, this document you all have access to and can also comment anytime. And we'll be able to see these comments in the future. Because I know today, we're not going to go through every single one today or dissect the whole thing in detail, but we wanted to make sure that you know that this exists, that it's here. It's an evolving document. It's not static. But at the top of the list really is about how do we better support our members, right? Residents being at the top of that list. You all are building some really powerful programs out there. There's a lot of challenges that we've discussed throughout the retreat today. How do we do this better, right? How do we do this better? That's the question I keep going back to. So the dashboard, the metrics that are there, they're just guideposts that are there. Stephanie mentioned earlier some of these metrics that are, again, you do them to satisfy funders, right? And I think ultimately you go back to what does it mean for you? What does impact mean for you, right? And for us, we're always looking to define that. And making sure that are we helping residents, right, to be their best self, for their programs to be in the top-notch position. Can we be this vehicle, this engine that elevates them to the next level? And so the dashboard that you have there, and if you're curious how to build this, ping me. The Google Data Studio is intense. It is taking me quite a bit of time. I work on it pretty much every day. I look at this every day. It's like my cockpit. I wake up, I look at it because it's automatically updates. So the data is live and you can play around and look at all time in terms of windows from 5 years ago to now, year to date, 30 days, 2 weeks, whatever you want, you can do it. Financial information, our exposure that we mentioned, aim for there that Ariana is building out, to thinking about our events, for example. So all of you will share the link to the survey that automatically populates. So are we making an impact there? Is this useful, for example, right? What else can we do? to other things, for example, our YouTube that Victoria is working on very slowly to expand that and making sure that we're getting out to more people. But more and in our programs, of course, right? The alumni base for our fellows program. But ultimately, the fundamental goal is, hey, are we moving forward? Are we helping our residents, fellows, interns move their initiatives forward? And one big number there in the middle that you may notice is the green box there. And it's been an active thing. So Claire and I have chatted a lot about this. What is the unifying metric that we can ask all residents about every year, once a year? And so one of the questions is to ask, hey, how many people have you engaged, right? We're never saying impacted, and because impact means many different things for a lot of different people. But our thesis is that the road to impact is through engagement. Okay, the road to impact is through engagement, whatever that means to you, right? The impact level, but you're engaging someone indirectly, directly, doesn't matter, right? It's through that engagement. And that allows us to provide a platform, a normalizing feature, if you will, normalizing platform for us to think about, are we helping you? So I will refrain from talking anymore, as I always do, and see if there's any feedback and so forth. So I see Stephanie, you jumped away. Yes, I'm all in for numbers and metrics as long as they inform progress towards a purpose. Yes, and aren't just check boxes for program evaluation. Exactly. And separating program evaluation for like, not confusing, right? Program evaluation to thinking about your metrics for your just performance, right? Performance metrics. And that is, I think, a confusion that can take place. That dashboard you have there is not an evaluation dashboard. It's not that. We have a whole separate thing for that. And it's important to keep that in mind as well. But you almost don't want to get lost in here. I think, Stephanie, that's where you're going now, right? It's easy to get lost in here. And so I'm curious, Stephanie, from anybody else, if you guys have dashboards like this or not, how have you used them to your advantage or disadvantage? I don't know. Stephanie, any thoughts?
I really like what Corey just put in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
Want to measure this is to be a good measure.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on how you've created those measures in the first place, totally. I think this is an awesome dashboard. I think for us, dashboards are really important, especially when they're visual. I think there were some people in here when I was watching the videos that are involved in data visualization, which is awesome because I think it makes such a huge difference to people's spirit and excitement to be able to see numbers change sometimes. So I'm definitely not opposed to that sort of a use of numbers and metrics. I think it's all about, like you said, how do we make sure they are aligning and moving us forward rather than becoming the target itself. As
Yeah.
Corey.
Yeah, and that's the danger. Absolutely, you gotta keep an eye on. I think for me, it's just making sure that we are, like, for the team as well, because we'll have different team members that are moving things forward, right? Performance now we're talking about. How can we do it better together as a team, right? Listening to residents, fellows, interns throughout, what do they need, and going back to that drawing board and saying, okay, we're not doing this really well. Can we improve this part, right? And it's evolving. That's what I love about SAI. It's evolving. It's amazing. If we go back 5 years ago, goodness, very different place. Very, very different place. But feel free to jump on anything that sticks out to you, or from the strategic plan, for example, to the dashboard, to anything else really, right? I will add, for example, the endowment. Part of that, to Stephanie's point, as long as there's a goal in mind, right? What are you actually trying to do? Is there a purpose of this thing? The endowment is there because that eventually will be an engine for us to be independent, right? And it's a goal of ours to be independent in the foreseeable future, because our model right now is not sustainable, right? I think a lot about sustainability, and just to keep it real with you all, if you go to the bottom left of the dashboard, right? Go to the dashboard, bottom left, and change the timeline, the dates. Actually, if you just pick a longer timeline, 2-3 years, notice at the bottom there, right? Some months where it's negative, right? We're negative net. And that is something that you have to keep in mind, right? Can you be sustainable? Can you continue to be sustainable in this way Where is that funding coming from? Is it reliable? Is it reliable? Can you rely on it to make projections, to make decisions about what you want to do? So you notice in that figure, if you span it, it's like a few months, bam, you get a little spike here, spike there, and then like 0, 0, 0 spike. A lot of uncertainty there. A lot of uncertainty with that model. So just to highlight one aspect, I think the finances just, it can be very stressful, absolutely. And I keep moving forward. I have, thinking about, okay, where can we find funding?
And if I may, on that point, just in case anybody is looking at their own work and seeing a similar graph, it's so normal for your graph to look like that. Like in the nonprofit world, especially when you're early on and you're starting something, it's really normal for you to have like big burst months and then really dark months. And I think that, recently I heard a sort of a friend-tor of mine, she was going through she was feeling very frustrated because she was feeling like she had a very small budget for the year, and she had all these things she wanted to do, and she felt like she could accomplish those, get more budget by the end of the year, but was very frustrated by it, by the reaction she was getting from funders, from everyone, saying basically that she had to move forward without the money that she needed. And I just want to also point out to people that that's normal too. Like to say that another way, if you start the year with less money than you need for the year, that's normal. Like, it's unfortunate, and hopefully we can all move past that and get to a stage where we have at the beginning of the year all the money we need for that year. But in the nonprofit world, it's really not uncommon to be looking ahead and saying, oh my gosh, my runway is only 6 months and I have a year. Then you got 6 months to raise the other 6 months of that runway. And that's unfortunate, but it's a very common place to be in. The only reason I say that is because I think for me, one thing I struggled with a lot in finances side of these things was I would hoard money. I would be like, I want like 3 years of runway before I spend a dime. I'm not going to do anything unless we've got this really long safety net. And one of the challenges there is it's really hard to scale that way. So there's a little bit of like comfort with risk that you have to develop in this work in order to be able to scale. Like, I needed more people involved, more people on my team in order to be able to get to a point where we were making longer term finances and we were able to hold on to those. So for what it's worth, in many cases, it actually does make sense to spend what you've got rather than hoarding it, even though it feels very uncomfortable sometimes to feel like you're spending when there's a deadline in sight.
Yeah, you can't hoard it, right? So by the way, friend-tor, new word for me, okay? New word. So thank you for that word, Stephanie. Rosario, it looks like you have a question or coming up with one.
I just had an idea. It's been really cool. Just everything we've done today has been super cool. I learned a lot already. One thing I was thinking about, because as we were doing, oh goodness, what are they called? The roundtable discussion, it seems like a lot of people are, really struggling with the question that you guys have been talking about a lot, which is just the funding aspect. And one of your strategic goals is to help support our residents by helping them to get grants. So one thing that I think might be cool for us to do, and this is something I've done with other organizations, is kind of have like a writing group where perhaps, once or twice a month we're meeting together, and that is just the time that we're dedicating to grant writing and then working with each other to figure that out. I think that might help us with that particular goal.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a grant I'm writing right now, and it's by myself in the corner. Would I love to have another person on the call doing the same thing? I probably would finish the whole thing in an hour. So
it's actually going to be a part of our fellows program, is to have them write one grant.
Yeah, in 10 weeks. And we had a success rate we trial run this, and one of the fellows that actually went through it got the grant, and it was like the biggest grant actually that SAI had ever helped anybody get. So there is that aspect. And we also, by the way, we're recruiting right now for a new grant fundraising officer. And I think that could be something that could help with, right? Scheduling these writing sessions once a month, once every 2 months, some frequency, right? To help when the deadlines are, and here's, you're going to write this grant, here's a plan you can follow, right? A lot of our time is just planning. As Stephanie said, planning to plan, there's a grant due in December, especially the federal ones. You gotta start like a year ago. So it's a good thought there, Rosario.
Yes, I mean, thank you. And please, I would love if we can continue. I mean, we could sit here and talk about this stuff all day, and I would love if people, as more ideas keep flowing, please do throw them out there, throw them out in the Slack universe, or email or direct message, or however you'd like to communicate with us. Please let us know. I love that idea, and that's something that my creative juices are flowing too, where we just start doing a little bit more co-working sessions within the SAI community. If we grants, program development, you name it, kind of as we go. And so be on the lookout for more of those later. We have come to the 2 o'clock plus beyond hour, and so I would like to extend, please, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us, to reconnect, to learn about something new today, and meet and just vibe with other people as well who are going through some of the same issues and problems that we've all been facing for the past year. I'm greatly appreciative and for everybody's time today. And as we continue out, I would just encourage us to keep this momentum that we've got and keep it flowing throughout. There will be ebbs and flows. And if you do feel yourself in an ebb of some sort and you're not quite sure, please do not hesitate to reach out to anybody. We're a community, we're here for you. And we would love to see just how we can continue growing and maintaining capacity over the next coming years, months and years as we go. This is my reminder, please fill out the survey that Bree dropped. Just to give some feedback on today's event, this is the first time that we've done this type of retreat. So if it's something that you'd like to see more of, let us know. If it's something you'd like to see less of, let us know. We can set up ways to make this. I want to say it's completely anonymous, so we don't know who's what you're saying, or who. We can't attach it to anybody. And so if it's something you'd rather see more like the symposium type thing that we did last year, let us know. If you'd like to see more of this retreat style, we're here. So, but on that note, again, thank you all from the bottom of our hearts. It's really great to be here and connect with you all.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful to see you all. And keep an eye out for collab exchanges that are going to be coming up twice a year. Those are Gather Town, really cool way to engage and meet someone you don't know. I think this month we might have some new residents that are going to give talks, and so keep an eye out for that as well. Yeah, just keep an eye out for stuff. And go ahead, Claire.
My cat's gonna now join the camera here too. If you filled out a internal funding request, Fanuel and I are reviewing those now, so you will hear back from us next week about if you chosen and status on those. So just heads up on that front.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Stephanie, for joining us.
Yay.
Have a fantastic Saturday, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, y'all.
Take some time for yourselves too, please.
Very important.
Thank you.